Hi, this is Thesha Jenkins. I'm the training director with the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. And this video is intended for students of Houston Community College. I hope that all is going well with each of you during this stay at home and that you are being able to continue with your social distancing. The video today is regarding domestic and dating violence. And just some reminders about screening your relationship. Just as people are being screened currently for COVID-19, we should also be doing ongoing screening of our relationships. What we know during this time of this pandemic, that there has been an increase in domestic violence, child abuse, and sexual violence. And so this is just to help you to screen your relationships so that as you stay at home, that you are safe. So domestic and dating violence is a health and social justice issue. What we know is that about 33% of women who go to the emergency room are there because of issues surrounding domestic or dating violence. So as an overview, we'll be talking about the dynamics of domestic violence. At the end of this session, you will be able to define domestic violence, list at least 3 statistics about domestic violence, and identify and discuss the 8 tactics used by abusers in abusive relationships. And also be able to identify resources to refer survivors of intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence, also known as domestic violence, is a pattern of coercive behavior in which one person attempts to control another through threats or actual tactics, which may include any of the following: physical, verbal, sexual, and psychological abuse. Just a few stats about domestic violence is that 1 in 4 women are abused in their lifetime. 1 in 4. That's about 25% of all women around the world experience abuse at some point in their lives. Domestic violence also impacts men, and about 1 in 7 men are abused in their lifetime, about 14%. In 2018 in Texas, 174 women were killed and 32 men were killed. 2018 is actually the first year that the Texas Council on Family Violence included the homicides of men related to domestic and dating violence. So we've talked about what is domestic violence. Now, what exactly does that look like? Well, when we explain domestic violence, what we know is that it's actually based on power and control and not anger management. And many times people have the belief that domestic violence is about anger management. However, domestic violence and sexual violence in reality is about power and control. It is about power and control. And so what does that look like? Well, it looks like these 8 tactics, because there are 8 tactics that abusers use in order to gain power and control in relationships. Those tactics are verbal and emotional abuse, isolation, minimizing, denying, and blaming, using children, economic abuse, intimidation, male privilege or decision-making privilege, and finally, coercion and threats. Now, here's what I want you to know, is that only one of these may actually be being used in an abusive relationship. So for example, a person who is in an abusive relationship may never have access to money. Economic abuse, which means that their partner doesn't allow them to work or takes their money. And they could be in a relationship for a year up to 50 years. And if that person never has the ability to have economic freedom, that person may choose to stay in that relationship because the abuser is restricting their access to money. So it only takes one of these tactics in order for a person to feel as though they have to stay in an abusive relationship. And what you will notice is that there is no physical violence here. So we also want to be very clear that just because a person has not been hit, shoved, pushed, or strangled in a relationship, it does not mean the relationship is not abusive, because it is these 8 tactics that abusers use to gain the power and control in a relationship. So what does it look like? Well, what I've done here is I've laid out the mindset. What happens to the survivor in that relationship? Because so many times when people are in an abusive relationship, people ask, well, why doesn't she leave? Why doesn't he leave? Well, it's because of the tactics that the abuser is using that the survivor takes on a mindset, and it's based, that mindset is what we call learned helplessness based on the work of Lenore Walker, the book entitled The Battered Woman. So going into the tactics that abusers use, we know that verbal and emotional abuse is a tactic that abusers use in a relationship. And so what that looks like, sounds like, is the abuser is constantly degrading the survivor in that relationship, telling them, you're so stupid, or you're so fat, you're so skinny, you can't even speak good English. Why in the world are you even going to school? You know, you are using all the data up on our plan by attending these classes online. This is not the time for you to be going to class online. So that person is constantly telling the survivor in that relationship things that lead them to believe that they can't continue, or that they lose their self-esteem. And maybe a mindset becomes, I'm so big, who would want me? Or why am I even continuing to go to school? All the classes are online and I can't deal with the stress. Why? Because the abuser is constantly telling the survivor in that relationship all of these negative things. So verbal and emotional abuse will cause the survivor to remain in the relationship because their self-esteem and their self-efficacy is so damaged. Moving on, isolation. Isolation is another tactic that abusers use in abusive relationships. And what isolation looks like is that the abuser keeps the survivor in the relationship from family and friends. And unfortunately, because of the nature of our current pandemic, we have the stay at home order. And so that's one of the reasons that we believe that we've seen some increase in domestic violence and other forms of abuse in the home, is because those individuals who once had the opportunity to maybe get away and go to class, those children who had the opportunity to go to school and where teachers could identify that they were maybe possibly being abused. The survivor in an abusive relationship, whether it be dating or whether you're married to someone, is that when you have the opportunity to come in contact with other people, that gives you access to resources. And under the current stay-at-home order, many individuals are having to be confined in a space with their abuser 24/7. And so what happens for someone who's in an abusive relationship that may not be allowed to have family and friends over, and that perhaps another form of isolation is not having your own transportation. And so not having the ability to come and go as you will leads a person to believe that I have no one else to turn to. I have no one else to turn to. So as you're asking yourself these different questions about your relationship, asking yourself, do you have a support system? Do you have a resource system? Are there people you can turn to? Because what happens in an abusive relationship is that the individual is isolated. The next tactic that the abuser could be using is minimizing, denying, and blaming, which leads the survivor to have a mindset of, it's my fault. Why? Because the abuser is constantly saying things such as, I wouldn't have cussed you out this morning, but you were asking so many stupid questions, and that I'm stressed out. That I'm not getting as many hours because of this COVID-19 situation, and I don't even know if I'm going to have a job next week, and you're asking me about money for your tuition. I don't have time for that. So yes, I yelled at you. Yes, I'm not wanting to talk as much anymore because I've got too much on my mind. So the abuser is constantly minimizing their own behavior, and they're blaming the survivor in that relationship for everything that is going on. And so many times the survivor in the relationship will choose to stay there because they're like, it's my fault that, if I didn't bug them about my tuition, or if I didn't, if I had cooked the right meal, if I had when I go to the store, if I had bought all the right items, then he or she would not be upset. So it's my fault that they are behaving that way. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. Using children is another tactic that abusers use. And many times what may happen in relationships where there are children, whether they be the children of both the abuser and the survivor, or they are children of the survivor, that the abuser will threaten to take the children away. They may be threatening to harm the children. And again, because of what is happening in our society today with the pandemic, that with the children all being home now, that puts the children at greater risk in abusive relationships. And it also puts the survivor in that relationship at greater risk, because there's a constant fear of maybe their children will be harmed if they're not doing exactly what it is that the abuser wants them to do. And the main mindset that I have found in 23 years is that so many times the survivor is staying in the abusive relationship because they're saying, I'm afraid I may lose my child or my children. So asking yourself, in your relationship or someone that you know, have they expressed fear of losing their children if they leave the person in which they are in a relationship with? Economic abuse. Economic abuse is not allowing the partner to work. So many times abusers will not allow their partners to have a job, or if their partner does have a job. And here's the thing, I also want to make it very clear that just because someone's in an abusive relationship does not mean that they are financially disadvantaged. I have worked with individuals who are making six figures. However, at the end of the day, they may be making $100,000 a year, but they only may see 10 to 20,000 of that money throughout the year. Why? Because the abuser may be having all of the funds directed to their account, and the survivor does not even have the PIN code or have access to any of the financial records. The abuser may cause the person to lose their job. The abuser may be damaging that person's credit. And just as a side note, wanting you to know that there was legislation passed in September of 2019 that makes it illegal for a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a husband or wife to use the other partner's financial information, because there's something around economic abuse where we call it financial coercion, and that is where the abuser may open up accounts in the survivor's name. They may sign different documents that say that they're gonna pay back an amount, and they do that in the survivor's name, which leads the survivor to having credit issues. So there is a law surrounding that now. And what happens with the survivor in that relationship is that they take on a mindset that I cannot make it financially because they don't have access to the money. Maybe they haven't been allowed to work. Maybe they've lost a job, and because they've lost several jobs, that when it comes time for them to have an interview, that the person interviewing them sees that they have such a sporadic work history, which leads to the person not being able to be financially solvent. Male privilege. And the whole idea behind male privilege deals with the issue that in relationships, in binary relationships, that the abuser, if the abuser is male, excuse me, that they are constantly telling the female in that relationship that, because I'm the guy, that's the way it's supposed to be. The female survivor in an abusive relationship may also be being told that, well, if you leave your husband, if you leave your boyfriend, that your children won't have a father figure, or that, that's just part of being a woman. And that is something I have heard over and over and over, whether I'm talking to adult audiences, and even as I go into middle schools and high schools, that I will have young men and young women say, well, that's just part of being a woman, that, the woman, the girl is the property of the guy in the relationship. And so that creates a mindset in women, whether those women are young women as young as 14 all the way into their 80s, are saying, well, this is just part of me being a woman. Why? Because we as a society reinforce the idea of male privilege, that women are considered to be property. Yes, even in 2020. Coercion and threats. With coercion and threats, that is where the abuser uses the threat of possibly telling the survivor in the relationship that if you leave me, I will kill you. If you leave me, I will hurt myself. Or, there's been cases, constantly cases, where the abuser may say that they're going to hurt a pet. And so something else for you to know is for safety planning purposes, is that there are shelters for individuals who have pets, and there's also laws to protect individuals who have pets, and they are afraid that if they leave their partner, that their partner may do something to their pet. So if you're wanting to get an order of protection, you're able to actually get an order of protection that also includes your pets. Other forms of coercion and threats, thinking about within the college setting, that maybe the partner says, I'm going to go and I'm going to tell the chair of your department that you plagiarized, or that, that you are not, in other words, just telling a lie to make that person afraid. So that could be a form of coercion as well. And then intimidation. That tactic is when the abuser really instills fear into the survivor. And that could be something, quote unquote, as simple as a look, just a look. Sometimes the way I illustrate this is that when, children go to Walmart and they get lost, and when their parents finally find them, they give them that look and they tell them, what, you better make sure that you don't get lost again. And your mama gives you that look. Just think about that time when you were growing up and your mama just looked at you, or your daddy just looked at you, and you knew that if you did what they told you not to do again, it was not going to be good. Well, the same thing, unfortunately, happens in relationships between adults, between young adults, that the abuser may simply give the survivor a look, even to the point that maybe if they're talking to someone, they may be at a party and someone says, well, hey, after this party, let's go and have breakfast at IHOP. And very simply, all the partner has to do, the abuser will look at the survivor and just give them that look. And that the survivor in that relationship feels compelled to tell their friend, oh, you know what, it's late, we need to get home. Why? Because their partner has given them that look. It is just a sense of fear. And many times what survivors will say is that they can't even really explain it. So asking yourself, am I ever afraid in my relationship? Does my partner just give me the look? Has my partner ever maybe thrown maybe a book across the room? Have they ever, hit the wall? All of those are forms of intimidation that instill fear in the survivor, to the point that they may say, I'm afraid, and I'm so afraid that I won't leave the relationship because I don't know what my partner is capable of. So I hope that this has been helpful. Some resources, legal resources, are organizations such as AVDA, and on the following slide, I will give you that information. Also, there is the Family Criminal Law Division through the District Attorney's Office. Those are places that you can obtain protective orders. Shelters, there are shelters throughout Houston and the Harris County area. For those people who may be immigrants to the community, please know that if you are in a relationship, and maybe perhaps you're in a relationship where your partner is sponsoring you, so you have a fiance visa, please know that if you are being abused, and maybe your partner has told you that if you tell anyone, if you call law enforcement, if you tell anyone at the school what is happening, that I will have you deported, that there are laws in which to protect you. There is something called the Violence Against Women Act. Violence Against Women Act. And that piece of legislation is specific to immigrant communities. Also know that counseling is available. And even if you're not in an abusive relationship, however you have been, know that counseling is available. And counseling is available at no cost through local programs. Also, there is financial assistance through Crime Victims Compensation. Crime Victims Compensation. So you can find out more about all of these resources by actually calling the National Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE, 1-800-799-SAFE. Also, AVDA, Aid to Victims of Domestic Abuse. They are able to help with orders of protection, also sliding scale on divorces, if that's something that you are desiring. And that number is 713-224-9911. Also, you may contact the United Way at 211 for other needs that you may have. So I want you to think about, what is your takeaway from this session? What are some things that have come up for you about your relationship, or perhaps maybe someone you know? And then asking yourself, how can you support a victim or survivor of domestic violence? What we at the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council want you to know is that you are not alone. You are not alone. I want to leave you with this quote, very simply, that says, no significant learning occurs without a relationship. Relationship is important. And so I want to encourage you to find a way that if you are in an abusive relationship, to reach out and to call that 1-800 number, or to reach out to someone in your circle that is safe, that you can talk to, because you are not alone. All right. Again, this is Thesha Jenkins with the Harris County Domestic Violence Coordinating Council. And let's remember to stay safe, wash your hands, and stay at home. All right. Thank you.